Okay, we're live here on Keystroke Medium. I'm Josh Hayes here with the bald, the bold, and the mysterious Scott Moon. And today we have Davis Ashura, epic fantasy author, on the show. Davis has just completed his first fantasy trilogy, the Cast and the Outcast series, the third book of which, A Warrior's Penance, has been picked up by Audible Studios for production as an audiobook, which is super cool. So welcome, Davis. We're glad to have you on the show.
Thank you guys for having me.
We got your name through one of our other guests, Jacob Cooper, and he said, hey, you need to have this guy on the show. He writes very good, and he's a great guy, and we were like, yeah, let's do this. So could you tell us just a little bit about yourself and how you got started in writing?
So my full-time job is keeps me kind of busy. I'm a doctor, and so I've been wanting to write this since I was 15 years old. But the first thing you write isn't really that good when you're 15, and then college and medical school, residency, fellowship, and having two kids kind of sucked up all the time that I could have doing anything creative-wise. And when we moved after fellowship down here to North Carolina, I wrote a terrible book. It deserved to be burned, and it has never seen the light of day. And that was pretty much the last thing I wrote. That was in 2003. I tried to rewrite it. It was almost as bad, but not quite as. It was just a little bit improved. And then I pretty much stopped writing because I needed to build my practice and work and take care of the kids and that sort of thing. And then in 2009, my wife, she found one of the local community colleges was having a short story writing class. I took the class, and the novel writing class by the same teacher later on, and I started writing again after that. Eventually I found my way back to the very first thing I really wrote, which was in 1999, which became A Warrior's Path, and that's the first thing I published in 2014.
So that's your first finished novel and then first published novel as well?
Well, it was the first story that I really had an idea of where it was going to start and where it was going to end.
Okay.
What's the Warrior's Path about?
So it takes place in a world that actually has already experienced its apocalypse. It took place about 2,000 years in the past, and then the characters exist in the remnants of that world that was destroyed. And the creature, the demon that destroyed that world, still lingers around, looking to pick off people here and there. And there's a scattering of cities that have managed to survive, and my main character comes from one of those cities, and he has to unlearn a lot of received wisdom about what it means to be a warrior, what it means to be moral. The world that I created, it's called the Casts and the Outcasts. It's very much Indian in origin.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, there are castes, and of course that's part of the caste system of India. And then there are the outcasts, and he's a member of a warrior caste, the
Right.
warrior caste. And he, in his journeys, he discovers that some of the things that he was taught about the caste system and the outcasts were utterly wrong, and some of the things he learned about enemies was wrong.
Well, all of that's very, very cool. I'm fascinated by the idea of received wisdom. I kind of got my interpretation of what that means. So, what would be like an example of like a received wisdom, either in your fiction or just kind of in life in general?
Well, in life in general, at least as far as what I do, sometimes we consider received wisdom just what older doctors told us
Right.
was how we manage, certain diseases. And one of the more famous cases that I always remember is back in the 90s, there was an Australian senior house officer. I think he was a senior house officer at the time, which would be a second-year resident. He wanted to find a different way of treating stomach ulcers, and his view was that stomach ulcers were actually an infection, and the received wisdom at the time was that stomach ulcers were actually just due to stress. And he actually was able to demonstrate that it was due to an infection, and it completely upended our treatment of stomach ulcers, made it much more effective, much safer for people. And he
Yeah.
ended up winning part of a Nobel Prize in medicine for that. But the received wisdom that he was taught was completely wrong
Right.
about how to treat that.
So it sounds like you'd have either in fiction or non or in life, being able to evaluate what is received wisdom or I guess like a status quo that is useful, because sometimes that stuff's useful, but being able to break the mold, I guess that's something I think
Yeah,
that makes character stuff appealing, is people who can be a rebel,
yeah,
a little bit.
and that's part of what I tried to do with the series. Um, there's a religious aspect to the series. It's
Hmm.
based on the people that exist have their own religious dogma that they've followed. They've always believed it for 2,000 years. It's kept them alive. It's kept them safe.
Hmm.
And yet there's aspects of it that were wrong, that were misinterpreted, that
Right.
were even written down incorrectly. And you
Hmm.
only learn later on that there was a council 200 years after the world was destroyed, essentially
Right.
destroyed, that wrote these things down wrong.
That's familiar. Sounds familiar. I want to interrupt just for a second, because this show we're going to try to get some interaction if people want to interact. I have our keystroke at keystroke medium on Twitter open, so if people are watching and want to put a question up there, I'll try to watch for it and do that at some point during the show. So anyway, you were going to say something?
You mentioned that you've been writing since you were 15, and this was one of the first stories that you had completed the idea for. Can you tell us kind of the influential things that happened to create this story, and how the world of Cast and Outcast came about?
Sure. I created the idea for this back in 1999, right after I got married. I think I wrote maybe 50 pages and flamed out because I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. And after I started taking those writing courses and actually sitting down and finishing stories, finishing what I wanted to get across, then I wanted to come back to the cast and the outcast. It was always an idea um, that resonated with me. I remember traveling in India. We were driving along middle of nowhere, and I was talking to my sister. She's a psychiatrist, and what I really wanted to develop was the idea, this demon that I mentioned that destroyed the world 2,000 years ago. You know, that's a common theme of having a dark lord or a dark lady or something like that. Everything
Right.
from
Yeah.
Morgoth to Sauron to the
Hmm.
dark one of Robert Jordan or Lord Fowl from Thomas Covenant. I wanted something like that, but I didn't want something that was evil just because it was evil. I
Right.
can't get my head around that kind of thinking.
Hmm.
And so instead, I thought, well, what if this was a delusional, paranoid schizophrenic with the power of a god?
Yeah, that's
And
trouble.
so
Ha!
Yeah.
I talked to my sister about it because she's a psychiatrist, and I said, you know, I was just picking her brain basically, like, you know, what would a paranoid schizophrenic do if this person had a lot of power and voices were in its head telling it to do horrible things? And
Yeah.
that's where my demon came from, Suraith.
Oh,
Well,
very nice.
that's fantastic that you have that type of a network of family and friends to go for expert um, advice. Which actually, I'm going to ask a question here. Jacob Cooper asked through Twitter. He says, "Ask Davis how his medical knowledge played into his writing his series." So maybe this is a good time to talk about that a little bit.
So there's some murders that happen in the first book, uh, and you know, one of the things that I needed to make sure about was that the way the murders happened, there would actually be a coroner that would that would investigate these things
Right.
and would be able to rule out simple deaths that would be accidental or
Mhm.
deaths that you could explain. And so these deaths were inexplicable through the medical knowledge that I gave the characters at the time. And again, the city that I created, Ashoka, that was named after an ancient Indian emperor named Ashoka, who is still highly revered in India to a great extent because of how he lived his life when he sort of realized that the wars he'd fought when he was younger were not the legacy that he wanted,
Right.
and he did other things that were much better. So I created a city that was actually quite beautiful, or at least I think it is. Its people are decent human beings, um, and they're smart. They're not at a medieval level of technology, and that's it. They're never going to advance beyond that. They actually have pretty high level of knowledge of certain things, and so I was able to incorporate some of that medical knowledge in the murders. And also, there was one other person who died in a basically a fist fight, and he was a drug addict, and I needed to come up with some ideas of how do I explain that this person died of a drug overdose rather than a punch to the head?
Right.
And so I was able to come up with that just with what I knew.
Now you've mentioned that you're basing a lot of the setting on an Indian type world, and it's very different from the normal epic fantasy setting of like a medieval Europe, England type area. And I actually read a couple of reviews on your books that applauded that were excited that they could read an epic fantasy that wasn't set in a medieval Europe environment. And you mentioned the name of the city just now, and that you've incorporated some history and heritage into your series. Can you tell us? I mean, was that just a conscious decision that you wanted to write about that kind of stuff, or that you wanted to make it different from other epic fantasy?
It was a conscious decision to make it Indian. It wasn't
Okay.
necessarily to make it different, just to be different. It was,
Right.
I'm Indian. There's a long legacy of myths and legends outside of the Hindu religion that I can draw from, and there's just a lot of history from India that's a part of me. Even though I came over here to the United States when I was 3,
Okay.
I was raised on by my parents, and obviously a lot of their culture is part of me, and I wanted to use some of that.
I
Be
mean,
inspired from that.
that's a really a fantastic thing, and I think that fantasy and speculative fiction needs that in general because, the last several years with there's been criticisms within the author community about all the fantasy is all kind of the same and needs something new, and so a lot of authors that I like, they try so hard to make it different than just your medieval uh, Western Europe type setting, but this to me seems like a better chance. Um, to be more genuine, I guess, rather than just making stuff up straight out of your. I like imagination, but it's
Hmm.
really cool when it comes from kind of your life
When it
too,
comes from the
and
heart.
comes from
Yeah,
the heart, comes from your experience and your family and where you've been. I think it has a lot of potential. So I think it's good for the genre in general to get people writing from not just France or whatever.
yeah.
Not talking France, but anyway,
Germanic or England or
Germanic,
something
right?
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I
England.
love those kind of books.
Oh, I do too. Yeah, I'm a big Bernard or Cornwell fan. And so all
Hmm.
the Saxon Chronicles and stuff. They're excellent. So
Yeah.
You mentioned that you had the idea for the story, and that kind of you couldn't get away from that. Since writing the first book and then going through the sequel and then the third book and the story, has it changed at all the where the
Oh,
characters were
yes.
going and what your idea was? Can you talk us a little bit about the creation of the universe there, the world that we're talking about?
Uh, it's changed a lot. So when I first had the idea, in a lot of ways, I just had a Dark Lord and the Dark Lord's minions, and the only difference was it was a Dark Lady.
You
But the
must have
minions,
minions.
yeah, they must have minions, and the minions were essentially just orcs that looked like minotaurs. That was it.
oh, that's cool.
Um, and when I was writing the first draft of A Warrior's Path. I remember this really clearly because the leader of those minions, they're called Bales. They look like minotaurs, and they have a trident and a whip that are their primary weapons. But he was looking down at his other minions, who are these other species. They're called chimeras, and he was watching them eat, and he was disgusted by them. And then my fingers just he told me, I hate what I'm doing, and
That's
that
very
completely
interesting.
changed the entire arc of everything that would happen afterwards, because then the Bales became something more than just orcs,
Right.
and they became sympathetic creatures in their own right, who were a lot more interesting to write about with their own culture, and I loved them. I loved that leader that I created.
Yeah.
He was awesome.
Yeah.
And so that wasn't your original was just to have a dark and evil character, and then
Yeah,
when
he was just going to be Darth Vader, you know. He was just
oh
going to be
yeah,
leading the troops and killing whatever came in front of him.
Yeah.
But then he became a much more. He became noble, really.
talk
Uh,
about characters screwing up your story.
oh, he totally screwed that up.
I hate
Completely
when that
screwed it up.
happens.
But it was
Yeah.
it was a it was a wonderful thing to find him saying something like that. And
That's awesome.
even the main female lead, her name was originally given to some woman back in Ashoka that the main male lead knew at one time. But then I just thought, well, what if she ended up, somewhere outside the city and lost? And suddenly there she was. And suddenly I have a female lead to play off of the male lead, to play
Yeah.
off Rook.
I like, if I get in one of those favorite characters, it kind of goes a little rampant. That's an awesome feeling. It makes you feel like you're really doing some writing, but it is a little bit scary too, because especially if
That
you're trying
was
to
that
plan it
was
out.
spooky. Yeah, that was really spooky when Lee Dirge is that character's name, the Bale, when
Mm.
he said, "I hate what I'm doing." That was really cool.
Now things
Um,
just got complicated. Thanks for
I'm
that.
I'm curious to know when that happened, and we'll talk about kind of process later. But were you writing an already plotted out section of your story, or were you just kind of free writing with that character when that happened? I mean, obviously it was a surprise. Generally, when I sit down to write an already plotted out segment, I'm writing for that, and
Mhm.
so it's interesting to have when the character speaks to you, it happens naturally. Were you organically writing at that time, or were you writing to a point?
So I kind of have this is getting into the nitty gritty of how I write, I guess, but the way I write is a little bit, I guess, unusual, or maybe it's normal. I have a rough idea of where I'm starting from and where I'm going to end. Actually, I always know where I'm starting from, and I know how the story ends. It's the in between details that I don't know. And sometimes what I do is I just outline uh, a couple of chapters in advance, and it'll just be these are the bullet points of what's supposed to happen, and then I kind of flesh that out with a bigger outline, and then try to write prose that makes sense and reads well. And sometimes I'm just free writing where I know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't feel like writing it down, and I'm
Right.
just going to go with it and see what happens. And this was one of those instances where I was just going with it to see what happens. I knew it was supposed to be Lee Dirge's point of view,
Hmm.
um, but he was just supposed to meet with Sue Wraith. She was
Right.
supposed to give him some commands, and he was supposed to glory over the victory that they just had the day prior, and he upended it.
That guy, he's a troublemaker right there.
Yes.
Question from Twitter. Stephanie Lindsay asks, and like with all the questions we're going to do from Twitter, we're kind of new to this. Is if you got a question you don't want to answer, you want to table it or something like that, you can always just tell us, hey, let's come back to that later or something. And I haven't seen any that are too crazy at this point. Uh,
Okay.
but so anyway, Stephanie Lindsay wants to ask. She says, ask Davis to speak to how his personal life influenced the relationships between casts in the novels. Is that a question that
Oh, that's a tough one.
one would? Yeah.
So I guess in a way it kind of does because I'm Indian. My wife is not; she's white, and
Hmm.
so in some ways, I guess I'm sort of speaking to the universality of just you want to find someone you love, and it doesn't matter if they happen to be
Right.
of your ethnicity or not. It's who you love, and that was a big part of what I was trying to accomplish with the casts and the outcasts
Right.
was, Rook is from this very rigid. He's my main male lead. He's from a very rigid society. It's so rigid that there are 7 castes. Men and women of different castes are not supposed to touch one another.
Right.
If you're jostled in a crowd, that's different, but you don't shake one another's hand. You don't do that sort of stuff. You can be friends, but you don't touch ever.
Right.
And that's where he comes from. That's what he's always believed. And then he comes across a woman who is clearly not of a caste. She's of a mixed caste. Let me rephrase that. She's of mixed blood. She's from her parents are from different castes, and they loved each other obviously. And there she is.
Right.
She's born, and then he meets her, and suddenly he's forced to re-examine his own thoughts about what that caste system really means.
I think it's an excellent chance to raise the stakes, both on a raising the stakes on the personal level for your characters, then also for the broader society of your story. I think that makes good fiction also.
Yeah, it was a challenge also to
Awesome.
write it that way and not come off too preachy.
Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
it's interesting to me. I like when authors when you say raising the stakes, or a lot of people say, hey, you want to build this tree, put your characters in the tree, and then set the tree on fire. Um, but I like when authors take like a very simplistic, natural approach to raising the stakes for the story and the character. So you've created a character in this lead female who, by no act or will of her own, is already at a disadvantage because she's this mixed blood kind of, for lack of
Right.
a better word, outcast person. So she's already going to be looked down on ahead of before she does anything. And I like
Right.
that, starting behind the curve, but naturally starting behind the curve. I like those kind of characters in books. Those are the most interesting ones for me to read.
And she's fearless. She's faced with these warriors that are all purebloods. They're better than she is at being warriors,
mhm.
uh, and she never backs down. She's awesome.
Yeah. That's always a favorite for me. Most of my favorite characters in the Game of Thrones type stuff are the ones that should be afraid but are just not.
No, she's not afraid. Definitely not.
Awesome.
I like that you mentioned Game of Thrones there, because it kind of segues into this next question. You published the first book in 2014, and then it looks like by your Amazon page you've published one every year since
Right.
then. Well ahead of the epic fantasy author that must not be named here on the show that we just referenced. Did you plan the series out ahead of time to release once a year, or did you just kind of release them as they were done? And as a caveat to that, or a tag on to that, did you have the entire series planned before you hit publish on book one?
I knew where I was starting from, and I knew where I was ending. I knew I wanted to make it a classic trilogy because a lot of the things that I read growing up were classic trilogies. Everything from Lord of the Rings to the First Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, and that seemed to be the big thing back in the 70s and 80s was to have these classic trilogies, or at least the things that I read. And so I knew I wanted to make a trilogy, and I had an idea of where each book would end, like what would be the end point.
Right.
When I say it's a classic trilogy, um, it really is more like one long book. There's
Right.
not really any time frame that is distant between the end of book one and the beginning of book two. That it picks up just an hour later.
Right.
So it was really just one long book, and I wanted to try to write one book every year. And I would have gotten the third book out a little bit quicker, but I ran into a few complications, namely that I got the third book picked up by Audible Studios to do the production for the audiobook format,
Right.
and they wanted me to hold off on the release of the third book until Nick Podell, the narrator that did the first two books. Um, I published or produced the first two books myself
Right.
until he got the third book produced. They wanted me to hold off.
Got done. That was a question we had. Said about Nick Podell being the narrator. So obviously he did all three books,
He
or
did
he
all three books.
did all
Yeah, he
three.
was great to work with
Yeah.
too.
And
And so,
how'd you find Nick?
so I found Nick through ACX, which
Mhm.
is the self-publishing arm of Audible. I think
Right.
it's their self-publishing arm. But I wrote the first book. I published it on Kindle and a few other places, Kobo and Barnes and Noble. Um, and then I published the second book on Amazon and those other places. And they sold well. And then I happened to read Circle of Rain by Jacob Cooper, which was fantastic. And on my own website, I interview self-published authors who I happen to like
Right.
uh, when I like their books a lot. And so I asked Jacob, can I interview you? And he was like, sure, fine. And I asked him, Jacob had his book produced um, and as an audio book, and I'm blanking on who Michael Kramer. That's who he got to narrate the book.
Yeah.
The
Right.
same
Yeah.
guy that does.
Same guy that did the
Very.
Mistborn series.
Yeah.
That's
Very
right.
well known. He did all the Wheel of Time stuff. Him
That's
and
right.
I can't remember the other narrator,
Yeah,
but
he does Brandon Sanderson's works, and he did Robert Jordan's works, and he did Jacob Cooper's books. And so I asked him, "How did you find this?" And then, after the interview was over, we texted a few times, we talked, and it was a huge risk to take to produce my own audiobook because
right.
these narrators that are top flight, they'll work with you, but um, they cost a lot.
Sure.
You
And
get what you pay for when it comes to, well, anything,
Well,
but especially in
well,
Audible.
and for people that are listening that may not be familiar with ACX, there's two basic ways you can basically, if you take a story or your novel and you put it up on ACX, you can open it to auditions, and then people can send you samples, and that can be very interesting. And then you can either contract them and work out whatever their fees are, which could
mhm,
vary. Usually, you're talking probably. I don't think I've seen one for less than $4,000 or $5,000. I
right,
think you can go much higher than that,
it
and
can.
you can do a royalty share where basically you kind of hitch your wagons together, and it's
Right,
like a 7-year contract.
right.
So if you do a royalty share, you split the royalties 50-50 for a long time.
Hmm.
So it's
So
interesting to me that, and coincidentally, Jacob Cooper is also an audio book narrator, and he does a phenomenal job
does great work.
Yes, he does.
narrating. But I'm curious about, so you produced your first two,
Right.
and then Audible picked up your third one.
Yeah,
Um,
it was just a lark. I produced the first two. I made my money back, so I wasn't in the red. And I'd finished the third book, and this just on a lark, I thought, well, let me just see if Audible Studios or Podium Publishing or some other company would want to produce this book and work with me to maybe market it a little bit more than I can do on my own.
Right.
So I contacted them and told them who I was, asked them basically, are you interested in the third book or all three books? And I got a response back within 2 or 3 days that yeah, we would be very interested in working on the third book. And so, I had to read that email like 2 or 3 times, like, am I reading this right? Or because it didn't seem like why would they? It didn't seem like it would actually happen, and I was thrilled.
yeah,
People look into Podium. They're a pretty serious organization. I think they have um, some procedures and protocols for finding the best talent and making the best books into things.
Right.
And I'm to the point now where if it says Podium Publishing on it, I'm usually like, this is probably gonna be pretty good because they make good stuff. They work with good artists.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I'm not with Podium Publishing.
Oh, yeah, we're talking about the Audible, but you mentioned
Right.
those both together. The
Right.
same similar types of. Sorry, my bad on that. Um, so yeah, all three of your books are available in audio.
Yes.
Are they Whisper Sync? capable? I know some books are, some books aren't.
I think they are.
Okay.
I'd have to look. I've seen it on the page that it's WhisperSync available, but I'd have to look to make sure. And I wrote a short story collection in the same universe, and Audible Studios picked that up also, and so that's in production right now.
Yeah.
It does look like they are WhisperSynced.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's some of my favorite things is the WhisperSync ones because you can kick back and forth between the Kindle and the audiobook and it makes it I can get through books a lot faster like that.
Mm-hmm.
You and that the fact that Audible picked up your book, they've got, I mean, obviously they're part of Amazon, so Amazon has a huge force when it comes to marketing your books. I mean, obviously you had to have had better than average sales to get in the black with your audiobooks, and I mean your ebooks appear to be selling very well. Did the partnership with Amazon increase those numbers, or did you see a noticeable difference?
I did.
Okay.
I did. So when Amazon or when Audible Studios picked up the third book, I imagine they must have been sort of priming the pump a little bit for the 2 months that they were waiting on the book to be available after when Nick was narrating it,
right,
getting produced. My sales never really tailed off because usually you see, your book is released, it sells well the first month, it slowly starts to decline, and the second month, and by the third month or fourth month, or at least this has been my experience, it's really just treading water at 1 or 2 sales a day at most. And my audiobooks never really did that. They just stayed at this sort of nice level. And then when the third book got released, both of them have been selling a lot more than they were even beforehand. So it was pretty cool to watch,
That's got to be really excellent.
Yeah, my kids might actually be able to go to college and not have to take student loans. So
yeah,
I'm gonna take.
I got to pay for a cup of coffee this week.
Yeah,
so that's a win in my book.
Yeah,
my kids are gonna donate plasma like I did to get through college. That's the only...
my kids are better off than I was though, because they already like ramen noodles. So
there you go. Yeah.
Oh God, I wasn't ready for that one. That was good. That was awesome.
There's actually a new ramen noodle restaurant down in the Delano district. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I have not been there. No.
The other day, my kids want to go there.
I mean, I like ramen noodles. Cup of noodles is one of my. I have to do beef flavor though. I can't do chicken. I've tried to do chicken and I can't do it. It has to be beef.
See, I like beef. My kids love chicken, and my youngest is like this ramen noodle connoisseur or something. Right. And he's the sriracha chicken flavor. And
nice.
So he likes the spice. That's the Indian in him.
I had a hilarious story about college where I lost my dinner one day and I was just losing my mind, and I finally, like 2 hours later, I go open the microwave and there's my ramen noodles in there. I was like,
nice.
Yeah, I guess that's where it would be.
It's great. I like that you mentioned your kids, because I wanted to ask you, with your full-time job as a doctor, and then obviously you're a family man, married with kids, where in the world do you find all this time to write? Like
I don't watch TV.
But you do what?
I don't watch TV.
Ah, yes.
That is a big one.
I do. I watch maybe one show a night with my wife, and then the business thing of writing has become more of a pain than anything else. The business of publishing, where you have to look over stuff and think about how to market it. I'd much rather just sit down and write and do the marketing stuff, but usually it's just come home, eat some dinner, spend some time with the family, and then it's always around 9:30 that I just go into my cave, my office, and I write. And my kids are kind of like me. They like to do their own thing. They're very much introvert, solitary creatures, and so we could all be in the same room together. I could be writing, and they'll just be doing whatever they want, and we'd be perfectly fine. It drives my wife crazy, though.
That's a blessing, though. So much time nowadays, everybody thinks if you're with sitting in the same room with somebody, you got to be talking or else you're being rude. But there's
Right.
something to being able to share space without being all in each other's business all the time.
Yeah.
So that's a blessing.
I
Yeah.
agree.
That would be great.
So you write at night. Do you have a ritual? I mean, you say you can write in the living room with your kids, but if you go to your cave or your office and you sit down, what's kind of like your daily routine, your daily ritual like?
Well, I have to look at sports first, just see what the scores are. I'm certain I will.
True.
So,
Go Chiefs. Go
I
Chiefs.
got stuck with the Bengals, so they'll break my heart one time a year.
Also, we have a lot in common.
Well, I'm not sure if I would mention that on live.
Yeah, well, if you're raised in Cincinnati, it's what you're stuck with. Is you're a Bengals fan, If I could choose to be a Steelers fan, I would, because at least then I know my team's going to be pretty good year in, year out, and a couple of Super Bowls. But
you can wear a disguise or something.
What it is. But after I check the scores and stuff, I turn on iTunes and I choose 15 to 20 songs that I just want to play. It almost always starts with one song that I discovered while watching The Walking Dead, and it's called Regulator, it's called The Regulator by Clutch. And so I always listen to that. That's my first song. And then I try to start writing. And usually about 2 or 3 songs into the writing, I need to turn my mind off a little bit. Some people can just write and write and write. I can only write for like 10 or 15 minute bursts, and then I have to step back for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then I can get back into the writing again.
Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of the same way. There's only been rare occasions where I can sit down and go for an hour without going, oh my God, I want to stop.
Yeah.
It depends for me. So there's time with something's very new and fresh. I have a lot better. Or you run into one of those characters that's your favorite character that's not really gotten a lot of face time, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I love this character. We're gonna go crazy.
Yeah.
So and then half that stuff you can't use because it's not part of the story. But you have fun writing it.
It was fun writing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I'm definitely still the 10 or 15 minute writer. I can write 10 or 15 minutes, then I got to turn my brain off for a few minutes.
Do you set a timer for that, or you just kind of wing it?
No, I just wing it. It's just how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
I'm writing along, and I'll reach a point where I'm tired, and I stop.
Yeah.
How many words do you generally get a day?
I usually try for about 1,000 words a day on average, and so before I published, I was able to hit that every single time.
Right.
And the more books I've had out, the less often I've hit it, because the time I spend doing, writing, it's so much more of it is spent doing publishing and marketing now, and I can't stand it.
Yeah.
But it's what it is, and if I just wanted to write in a vacuum, that would be fine also. But I'm a little bit too arrogant, I guess, because I want other people to read it and tell me how awesome it is.
Please tell me I'm awesome. That's going to be my new theme for my marketing efforts. The thing about marketing is I wouldn't mind doing the work for marketing if I was reasonably confident any of it worked, because sometimes it's hard to tell what really is worth even spending.
That's what I've found as well. When I released my first book, when I had my 100th sale, my family we all went out and celebrated. It was like, woohoo, 100 sales!
All right.
At the time, the average self-published author sold 250 copies. So I thought, 100 sales in 3 weeks, I'm on my way. I'll get to that 250.
Yeah.
And I went way past it. But I don't know how it happened. It's like it started slow, and then suddenly it just took off. And to this day, I don't know why it took off. Like, why me? Why was my book suddenly picked up and everyone, or not everyone, but a lot of people were reading it?
You probably just wrote awesome books, and that's it.
That must be it. It's got great word of mouth, and so everyone thought, we got to read this book.
Yeah.
That and the overarching elephant in the room, which is luck, sometimes.
Yeah.
But
you got to be ready for it, though. That's the thing, is a lot of people, and in the persistence, I I wish I could remember the quote, but I've seen several versions of this quote that the biggest thing you want in any field of endeavor is just straight persistence.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
You know.
I think so. I think that's true. You can write one fantastic novel, but you're not going to be Harper Lee. There's only one Harper Lee. There's only
Right.
one To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
That's such a fluke. I have several people I met early on in the self-publishing thing back in like around 2012, and I've seen them produce promote their books and do their marketing. But every now and then I'll run across somebody I met early on, and they're still pushing the same book,
Right.
and it hasn't latched on yet. And you're like, at some point you need to write something new or try something different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And things like that. But persistence is incredibly important. And anybody that thinks they're getting into the writing to make fat stacks of cash, is that what Nick Stevenson says? It's going to be
Fat
easy.
stacks.
Fat stacks of cash, and I can quit my job. It's like, that's probably not why you should do it, because it's a lot more work.
No. I mean, I would guess that you guys are pretty much in the same boat I am. You've got stories in your head. They're clamoring to get out. And you got to write them down.
Mm-hmm.
And you do the marketing because in some ways it's almost like to justify the time spent. Like,
Exactly.
I spent a lot of time doing this, and I'd like somebody to read it
Well,
and enjoy it.
you ever get this question, you probably all both do, is people say, well, how many books have you sold? And then I never know how to answer that question because, one, it's hard to track them. I mean, do you count like free giveaways during promotions? Do you count e-books the same as audiobooks and things like that? But people always want to know that, and usually they get frustrated with my answer because it's kind of a long answer, you know.
Yeah. I just tally them all up as equal. So I've done one free book giveaway.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wonder if the people that do download those free books are just downloading them.
I'm pretty sure that there's some truth to that. When I very first started, my very first one, Dragon Badge, was the book I did, and it was in 2012, and the free day thing still worked.
Right.
You know, you could do a free day, and then you see a huge spike in sales. And I think on one promotion, I wound up giving away like 26,000 copies.
Holy
I have 63 reviews, so I'm not sure how many people read it, but out of 26,000, I got 63 reviews. And I think a lot of people, especially a few years ago, were just filling their Kindles.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think too with the free, like with my series, I run a perma-free novella that opens the series. It's short, and I've done a few promotions on it, but my average throughout the day is generally between 15 to 25 free giveaways a day on that ebook. And I don't know where. I know that it carries over because I don't do any promotion for book 2 and I get book 2 sales. But I did a really big promotion for the first book a few months ago, and I got like, I don't know, 2,000 downloads, and then the trail has, it's steadily gone, but I still have the trail going, the high average, or high for me anyway. But I've just started to get in the last couple of weeks consistent reviews that are good reviews, and so I don't know. I mean, with a free book, people are going to download it and they're going to read it. Now, they may like it and go and get the next book, but they may not leave a review. I know I don't review every book that I read. So I don't know what the number was. I would go maybe and say 1 or 2% of the people that are going to read your book are going to leave a review.
Even if they buy it, if you sold 1,000 books, does not mean you're going to get 1,000 reviews.
No,
doesn't even mean you're going to get 100 reviews.
Right. I had a review a while back, and the person in their review said, I picked this book up last year and just got around to reading it, and they left me a review. And so, I guess you hope that eventually get around to getting down there. But so, Davis, you don't have any perma-free promotions or anything like that?
No, I've always just had my books on sale. I've done countdown deals, that sort of thing. That always bumps up the sales for the time it's not running. But there's always somebody that's going to have a countdown deal at the same time or right after.
Right.
And so it's for for me, it's actually been interesting that um, my ebook sales and my audiobook sales are right now pretty close to neck and neck. Like the number of ebooks that I've sold and the number of audiobooks that I've sold are fairly similar.
Right.
I'm 1 second. I want to touch really quick again on reviews, and not as a numbers standpoint, but as I know when I get reviews and they're good reviews, I feel good about it, and then when I get bad reviews, I feel really really crappy about it.
I hate the world.
Oh, yes.
And I know that and I don't respond to the crappy ones.
Oh, never.
But at
No.
the same time, you still take them to heart because it's your writing.
Right.
We got another question in that didn't come in through Twitter, and they're curious on do reviews, positive or negative, affect what you're currently writing on? I know that your trilogy is done.
No.
That's a great question.
Even when I got the few bad reviews I did get, it never impacted the story arc in terms of what I was going to do. And the story is complete now. Now the third book is complete, and so I can't really go back in time and change anything.
Right.
Some people don't like some of the romance that I include, and I thought I telegraphed that pretty heavily that I like romance.
Sure.
I don't like grimdark. That's not the kind of books that I wanted to write, and that's not the kind of books I generally read.
Right.
But one of the most wonderful things about life is romance and love.
Oh yeah.
And
Sure.
and I wanted my characters to experience that. I didn't want them to just be fighting, and killing.
Right.
And so, the third book was actually structured in a way. If you remember the movie Aliens, it had that slow beginning right before they dropped off the I think it was the Nostromo. Wasn't that the name of the ship?
I think
Yeah,
that's
that
right.
was
Actually,
if you're talking about the first Alien, then it was the Nostromo.
Yeah, that was the Nostromo. What was the Sulaco?
That's the
then?
Sulaco. That's the second one.
That was the one in the second one.
I'm
Right
gonna
after,
geek out because those are my favorite movies.
yeah, those are
well,
fantastic.
right after they take the dropship out of the Sulaco, that's when the movie really starts picking up, and that's how I
Yep.
try to structure the third book. But if you remember in Aliens, after that first alien encounter, when they have to barely escape, all the Marines are being killed, and then there's that pause where they can sort of settle down
Yep.
and try to plan for what happens next. I wanted those kind of steps of slow build up, high intense action, a pause, and in those pauses, I didn't want them to just be martial and military. I
Right.
mean, I could have done that. I wanted love, and so I chose love.
I think having a full experience, a full palette of emotions, those pauses are all about the rhythm and the pacing of your book. It's
Right.
different for everybody, and I would argue that even military fiction and stuff, when you go out on your hero's quest, eventually, if you go all the way around, you're trying to impress a girl someplace. So
Right.
there's always going to be some romance at some place, either in the background, or off stage or something. So.
Right.
I kind of like. I'd like to talk about. You mentioned that your series is wrapped up. You want to talk about anything that you're working on today? Where are your current projects still in fantasy?
Yes. I grew up reading Greek mythology. That was the first thing that I read. Then Norse mythology, then Arthur C. Clarke, and then there was this long stretch of time where it was science fiction, and then I read The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and then it was a mix of sci-fi fantasy. But over time, it became more fantasy. I mean, I have an idea for a science fiction story that I want to eventually tell,
Mhm.
but I mentioned the first true story that I had where I knew how it ended was what became The Casts and the Outcasts. But I only wrote about 50 or 60 pages before I quit. That was in 1999. And then I didn't really do any writing again until 2003. And then I wrote my first novel, the one I finished, which was god awful. And it remained god awful through 4 subsequent iterations, all of which were Well, they got progressively better. They
Right.
weren't all god
It's all
awful.
part of the process, part of
But
the
it was,
writer's journey.
that's right. It was my writer's journey, not the hero's journey. It was,
Yeah.
where my fingers got sore from typing. But um, I want to get back to that story. I've written 4 or 5 editions of it, and this time I'm trying something completely different, resetting a whole bunch of different aspects of them. I want it to be sort of like Chuck, the TV series, a little bit funny,
Right.
with
Oh yeah.
That'd be
with
cool.
with this guy that's kind of bumbling through life and just happens to run into something that transforms his life. In his case, it's the character that I have in mind. It's a little bit different, but it's going to be a little bit like Chuck, a bit of an urban fantasy that turns into a portal fantasy and becomes an epic fantasy. That's what I have in mind. It's
I'm
not
pretty
all
sure.
in one book though.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that would
Fun.
sell. That sounds like a good time. Um,
When you we usually mention this earlier, but when you write, do you use just strictly Word, or I use Scrivener?
I use Scrivener. I wrote all my stuff on Word until book 2 of the
mhm.
Cast of the Outcasts, the Warrior's Knowledge. I wrote that on Scrivener. I found Scrivener somewhere somehow. I can't remember exactly how, and I tried it out, and I put a Warrior's Path in Scrivener, and I realized, oh God,
This is
that
pretty
makes it
cool.
so much easier to
So
write.
much easier. Yeah.
I
So
I
I switched.
in
And
our
now they
early
have the Scrivener iOS out now, which is fantastic.
and that's what I was talking about because I've been kind of promiscuous with my different writing platforms. I'm like Scrivener and Word and Google Docs and some paper. I just all over the place. Well, now with the Scrivener for iOS, I've been just writing in Scrivener, and I've been so much more productive, not to keep changing things back and forth between formats. So I'm a
Yeah.
huge fanboy of Scrivener iOS right now. So
Yeah.
I recommend people try it out.
I've recommended that to my writing group also, and some of them are slowly making that transition.
Mhm.
1 or 2 of them are, and it's a hard program to learn at first. And the one thing about Scrivener that I found is that it doesn't work nearly as well on Windows as it does on Mac.
No, it
That's
doesn't.
that's where I started initially, and then I eventually got a Mac. And Scrivener is the thing is it takes a while to learn, but you don't have to make it that complicated. You can use it the way
No,
you want to use it. So I would
right.
recommend that. Those are
Is your the writing group you mentioned, is that an in-person writing group, or do you guys meet online, or how does that work?
It's an in-person writing group. It's when I did that short story writing class that I referenced back in 2009.
Oh yeah.
And then we did this. Then I did this novel writing class, and so a number of the students in the novel writing class, we decided, well, let's have a writing group.
yeah.
And the first time that we met, there was like 16 of us. The
Oh
second time we
wow.
met, there was 8 of us, and
Hmm.
then after that, it drifted down to about 3 or 4 souls, and some people coming in and out as time permits. But there's
Right.
3 of us that have been around the writing group since 2009, and we still meet every 2 weeks.
And so that was in 2009. So that was before the huge Kindle indie breakout. So these are serious writers that uh, didn't necessarily come to it thinking they were going to indie publish or something at that time.
Yeah, all
They
of us
just wanted to
thought
write.
we'd make fat stacks of cash in the traditional
Fat
publishing field.
stacks of
Fat
cash,
stacks of cash.
making it rain.
All expense tour of of all the bookstores and
Yeah,
limousines.
we'd walk into the Barnes and Noble flashing the Johnny Manziel money sign, going like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Never worked out well.
I don't know if that's ever happened for anybody. Um,
um, it's funny because Scott and I started this show off of our writing group, and our writing group was just 2 people.
yeah,
My wife used to
two,
laugh at me
two
because
people's a group, right?
Yeah, it's more than an individual, so yeah.
yeah, well, I'd tell her, and this was a couple years ago. Actually, it's probably a year ago now that we started meeting every week, and I said, okay, I'm going to go to my writing group, and she goes, so you're going to meet Scott? I'm like, yes, it's our writing group, and
Yeah,
we're going to write.
I think technically we don't even qualify as a gang, so I think you got to have at least 3 people.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah, definitely not. We're a writing duet. I'm going to go do our duet session.
That's right.
Exactly.
Well, we're coming up on the hour, and like it always does on these fantastic interviews, it goes by way too quick.
I got like 30 questions just popped into my head.
Well, do you want to hit one of those real quick, Scott? And then.
Oh no, let me look at. I'm trying to make sure we covered everything there. So I don't know. I guess more than questions, it's I'm just enjoying the conversation. So we could probably talk for quite a while longer.
I think so. This has been a lot of fun so far.
Where can your readers find out about you and your writing?
So a couple places. My website, www.davisashura.com, has the glossary to The Cast and the Outcast, some excerpts from Book 3, the maps of the world. My blog is there also. I also post on Facebook, so if you look for me at Davis Ashura, you'll find me on Facebook also. I'm supposedly on Twitter, but to be quite honest, I mean, I don't have time for all that social media stuff. I mean,
I just followed you on Twitter, so.
Well, I'll follow you back, Scott.
There you go.
But I don't really. I post on Facebook more than I post on Twitter.
Right.
I have time for one social media outlet, and that's going to be Facebook, just because I'm used to it, and I'm too lazy to figure out Twitter.
I think you can make your Facebook stuff automatically post to Twitter if you.
I think so, but again, I'm too lazy to figure out how. I guess I should probably learn that.
Twitter's kind of gotten overrun with people that are just kind of auto tweeting and stuff. So but I like Facebook and met a lot of good people on there. So.
Yeah, and you know, I follow a few other authors on Facebook, like Jacob, obviously. I mean, he and I are pretty good friends now. I think we text to each other 2 or 3 times a week. My phone makes this weird dinging sound, and my wife's like, "Who's that?" It's Jacob, and so.
She's like, yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I work really late, so what I like to do is send Josh about 15,000 Facebook messages, so when he wakes up, he's got like a small novel. Writing related.
See, Jacob is way out west. He's in Utah. Right. And so I could just wake up at 8 when he's still asleep and send him probably 20 text messages.
Yeah, totally ambush.
We need to have a Jacob Cooper let's mass text bomb him day where we all wake up and just and don't tell him we're doing this. It's going to be a secret.
Well, I think he asked a question on here earlier, so I'm pretty sure he already knows about it now that we.
No, he's not going to know. We're going to edit this part out of the live broadcast, so he's not going to know. And we're just going to mass text bomb him tomorrow morning.
Using our sci-fi.
But those are the places that people can reach me, are through my website and through Facebook. And the Indians who have read my book have caught on to the joke in my pen name. You know, Davis Ashura is just my pen name. It's not my real name. Okay. And in some ways it sounds Muslim because there's a Muslim holiday called Days of Ashura, but that's not where it came from. It's not Muslim. It's actually a joke in the Hindu religion. If you pronounce my name correctly, it's Devas and Asuras, and that just means gods and devils. So I was trying to come.
That's very cool.
That's pretty awesome.
I twisted gods and devils into.
We'll have to have another show. We talk about pen names. That's a very interesting topic to me. And then I was going to ask you earlier, just real quick, do you think that you're going to have a chance to do marketing in India with your writing? You think that's going to appeal to that? I imagine that's a fairly large audience.
It's a big audience. There's a lot of English speakers in India.
Somebody told me there's actually probably more in India than there is in the United States.
Probably because India has about 1.1 billion people, and I don't know what percentage are fluent in English, but all education all higher education is conducted in English. Like all your engineering, medical, math, all of that stuff is conducted in English.
Yeah.
But there's a huge percentage that are fluent in English. Whether I have a chance to do any marketing in India, it all depends on what's available, because I don't know how to market in India. I've done things like Facebook advertising, which didn't really work. I mean, I got tons of people clicking on the link, but nobody even looking at downloading the free samples or anything like that. So it's I don't know what the answer to that would be. I'd love to, because this is very much what I wrote was very much an Indian epic fantasy.
It seems like a very natural fit, and I'll be really curious to see where that goes over the next couple of years.
Yeah, it'll be interesting and exciting. I hope it works.
Excellent.
Just off the top of my head, before we quit here, Davis, you may want to check out Joanna Penn and go through her podcasts. If I remember correctly, she did a lot of marketing in India, and she has a big following in India. And
what's her name?
Joanna Penn. I can't remember what her podcast. TheCreativePen.com.
TheCreativePen.com.
Oh, The Creative Pen. I know who you mean.
Yeah.
He does a lot of world traveling and markets to lots of markets like that. And yeah, she might be somebody you might want to connect with.
Absolutely.
Okay, well,
she seems pretty savvy when it comes to the marketing.
Yeah, super nice person as well.
Well, hang out for a minute, Davis. We're going to wrap this up real quick and get on with our day here. So to everybody that watched live, thank you for tuning in. This has been live.
Thanks for asking questions. That was cool.
Yeah, that was interesting. We're going to have to continue to do that. I like that trend. But we have been live here with Davis Ashura. As always, I am Josh Hayes here with Scott Moon. We are Keystroke Medium, and thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you on the next show. Take it easy.
See you guys. Thanks for having me.